Okay. Hi. Hello, guys. Today I have very special guest to my channels. This is Moses Lee. He is the CEO of Michigan Language Center. That is a very famous English center in Ann Arbor, Michigan, that already operate for more than 40 years or almost 40
That's
years.
right, 42 years.
Oh, it's long. Yeah. And this English center, they are collaborating with other companies in the areas to um, open English business class. And my company is one of their partners, and I have a great privilege to participate in their class. That is why I
Thank
invite
you.
Moses to my channel today to talk
Great.
about the hierarchy in communication in academic and workplace environment. So, Moses, could you please give us a very brief introduction about yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having us. And hello, Vietnam. Um, Michigan Language Center has been in Ann Arbor, Michigan for over 42 years. And we are the
Mm.
longest running private English school in the area. And we work with people from all over the world, from over 50 different countries. We serve people who are planning to go to university, planning to live in Ann Arbor, and very importantly, a lot of the professionals who work in and around Ann Arbor area. And more recently, we have gone completely online during this COVID-19, and now we are providing classes and instructions to people in Poland, in China, in Egypt, in Brazil, and hopefully very soon in Vietnam.
Yeah, very exciting. So um, I may talk to you earlier about the reasons why I want to talk about that topic because it's quite related to language a little bit, but also it's more related to the cultural. And I remember in the class, you teachers not really teach, but we talk a lot about American culture, like how you should react or communicate with your coworkers and the
Mhm.
bosses in the workplace. So that is why I really want you to share your opinions for Vietnamese student or
Great.
anyone foreigners employee when they come to United States and they can do the best in the workplace.
Happy
Right.
to do that.
Yeah, okay. Because when I do videos in my channels, whenever I translated my conversation with my boss or my professor in university, I always translate it literally like you and I. And
Mhm.
you might know, like in Asian language, a lot of Asian language in general, they have special pronouns to show the hierarchical
Yes.
relation, right,
Mhm.
between people. So, like for example, uncle, auntie, brother, sister, even though they are not family members. Um, so, but because I think they really have hierarchy in the workplace or in
Yes.
academic
Mhm.
environment. But in United States, I don't feel that much. Or so I can say that I totally feel to be equal to my boss. Like I can freely talk with him, like my friends, even though he is my boss, my managers, or he's older than me, or
Mhm.
he might be the same age as my father-in-law.
Yep.
But when we talk with each other, I just feel like we are equal, like friends. So that is why when I translate it into Vietnamese, I always say you and I.
Mhm.
Uh, and a lot of people say that that way doesn't sound politely. So I really want to hear your opinions about that. Like, do you think in workplace the hierarchy as it in two
Exists.
aspect,
Yeah.
yeah, exists in two aspect, language and etiquette?
Yes. Yeah. So in America, we are more egalitarian than hierarchical. And by egalitarian, we mean much more of a flat organization
Mm-hmm.
versus one where there's someone on top. And maybe I just show this really quick picture with you that I often show people on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
This is a picture of the difference between Western culture and Eastern culture as it relates to the boss. So you can see the picture on the left is, the boss is amongst equals, amongst peers, amongst people. He's one of them. And in Eastern culture, very much the boss is higher, bigger, more important than the rest. And I think this helps to better understand sort of some of the differences that we see between what people experience in the workplace in Vietnam and what people experience in the workplace in America. And it does come across into sort of etiquette and language, as you kind of alluded to. So, for example, in my workplace, in the company that I used to work at, I ran a tech startup. And before that, I worked for an automotive company. People just call each other by their first name, right?
Yeah.
No matter what level they are. So if Bob or Mary is my boss, I don't say Mr. Bob or Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so. You just say the first name.
Yeah.
And bosses actually want to be called by the first name. But in Eastern culture, I know, right, when you were growing up, you didn't do that, especially in the workplace. People respected authority and certain titles.
Right.
So I would say you see less formality in the United States, though there are some exceptions to that, of course, in certain industries. But by and large, Americans are much more informal about roles and titles in position. They're much more, much flatter in terms of how they view each other and the organization.
So you say about exception. So what is the exception? Can you give some examples?
Yeah, exactly. So there's several exceptions that I would say. For example, when you're growing up in primary school, so in kindergarten through 12th grade in America, students still call their teachers either teacher, Mr., Mrs. And I would say that that's because there's generally an age gap between teacher and student. So for example, in elementary school, my son right now, he's 9 years old. He has a teacher that's much older and he calls her Mrs. So-and-so. Okay, so, and that's just respectful. As young children growing up in America, they want to learn to respect adults. But there's this transition when a person becomes an adult. By the time you kind of come of age, maybe 18 or 21, people want to start treating you like an adult, like a man or a woman. And a lot of sort of the hierarchy starts to fade away.
So can I understand that you won't call teacher, no, professors as Mr. and Mrs. when you go to college, right?
So in college, a lot of people will say professor. And again, academia, still there's sort of a hierarchy. But I would say, for example, when I graduated from college and I met some of my former professors, they just wanted me to call them by their first name. And then a funny thing I've actually noticed as well nowadays, I went to school and I graduated from the University of Michigan maybe 20 years ago now, from undergraduate and graduate school. And I used to call my professors by Professor so-and-so or Dr. something. A lot of them today may actually just tell even their undergraduate students, don't call me professor, just call me Jeffrey, just call me George. They want just to be called by their first name, just because culturally, a lot of people want to even say like, yes, I'm older than you and I'm probably more experienced, but we're both still learning together. We're still both discovering new insights and we can learn from each other.
I think it's quite interesting input because when I was in my university, because I came here for master degree, not undergraduate, so I always call my professors as their first name, and this is what they request.
Mm.
So I didn't notice that student in college, they call professor by Mr. I don't think they call by Mr. or
No, they would
Mrs.,
say
right?
professor. They'll
Right.
use
They
the
will call the
term
professor,
professor. Yes.
right? Yeah. So do you think it's because of the maturity? Not
Yeah.
only like when you're studying master, so it's more like you are studying and working for them at the same time, not
Yeah.
only studying, and you have like somehow like knowledge and can share the knowledge with them.
Yeah.
It's not like you are in kindergartens or
Yeah.
in K-12, right?
Yes.
And and when you move to the workplace, they go and working in a professional field. So basically, you are equally in maturity, right? It's
Yes.
just like the difference in working experience, like the years of working experience.
Yeah.
So the
And
gap is visible.
yes, 100%. I would say this actually reflects sort of again, the egalitarian view that people have about work and about leadership and best practices for leading and running an organization. Um, Probably some of the most successful organizations that you see today are very flat,
Mm-hmm.
meaning like the CEO of Facebook
Mm-hmm.
probably is just amongst his peers constantly. And people just say, call me Mark, or even the CEO of Google or Microsoft, or a lot of these large tech innovative companies. The leaders often are amongst the people. They might
Mm-hmm.
even have, they may not even have an office. They just kind of sit amongst
Mm-hmm.
everyone else, makes him or herself fully available for asking questions, takes people out for drinks. So for meals, like it's very much all these great organizations, they try to get the best out of everyone, and they don't want artificial hierarchy or barriers preventing people from giving their very best to their organization. So that kind of culture, I definitely see entering into academia. You
Mm-hmm.
see more of that happening. And I would say that there are a lot of traditional industries, like, for example, legal or banking or finance, that probably still has hierarchy,
Mm-hmm.
but you're seeing less of it now. For
Mm.
example, at banks, some people will now have a dress code that is more relaxed. So you're not wearing a suit all the time. You might be able to wear informal clothing into the office more. They're
Mm-hmm.
more friendly with each other, less hierarchical than before. Because I think people just recognize that these management practices where everyone feels like they can contribute and no one person is better than the other helps to build more compelling and competitive companies and
How about
organizations.
yours? How about your center? Because you guys are kind of mixed between academic and normal business.
Yeah.
So,
Now, because I come from business school, I had my own technology company before. We definitely have a more egalitarian structure. Now, I took over the school about 3 years ago, and the previous owner was of a different generation,
mm-hmm,
and I implemented certain new practices with him just to increase communication, increase transparency, and build more of a sort of egalitarian environment. And I would say that's just a result of different management styles and culture, different generational culture shifts that have happened. I would say you're seeing more of a drive towards this egalitarian model
mm-hmm.
in the United States than we have probably in we've seen more of this in the past 10, 20 years than in the previous 50.
Yeah. So how about etiquette? Like, I guess that in language right now, it doesn't show any the hierarchy. But
Mhm.
how about the etiquette? Even
Yes.
in the flat company, do you think that we have any etiquette that new employers or like young staff should uh, should be aware of?
Yeah. So I would say egalitarian or flat organizations does not mean that you can treat coworkers like your brothers and sisters and your family members, just very rough and frank and sometimes very sharp tones. So I would
Can you give
say,
example of sharp tones?
so like, you know, with my children, I might just tell them to do something and not say, or, we might be very, if they do something wrong, we might correct them very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. But I think in the workplace, you still want respect. So there's a difference between flat and disrespectful. And I think sometimes people from more Asian, Eastern countries may see that the way we treat each other is very disrespectful. And I would say that it's not disrespectful. It's egalitarian, but respectful. Okay. So for example, we're still saying please and thank you. We're still
Right.
being polite to each other. We're still wanting to keep other people's egos in check. And we recognize that people do have pride
Mm-hmm.
and egos, but we're not smashing them. We're supporting one another. We're using language that is polite, that is respectful, that is kind, that recognizes when people do things and saying thank you, acknowledging when you see great work. So I would say it's this sort of kind of mix that we're seeing of yes, it's flat, it's friendly, it's collegial, and very respectful, polite at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But my question is more focused on the relation between a lower level to the upper level.
Yeah.
Like someone in the lower level, do they have any things like special, like maybe like special terms, special words that they should use when they speak with the upper level,
Mm-hmm.
or do they need to pay attention um, on avoiding some actions or something like that?
Yeah.
Because what you are talking is more about between co-workers,
Yeah.
or
Mm-hmm.
might be because you are CEO, so you are looking like from above to the lower level. But I'm asking about the lower level when they look up the upper level.
Sure. Okay, great. Yeah. I used to work at an investment bank when I came out of college, and I
Uh-huh.
was the lowest person in my organization. And I would say that my boss, he definitely treated me like a friend. He took me out to the bar, bought me meals,
Mm-hmm.
talked to me. And I would say that I definitely, in those interactions, was very respectful, and had a sort of a air of gratitude, and toward him, and at the same time, always trying to do my very best to support the work we were and contribute. So I knew he wanted me to contribute. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't want me to think like he had all the answers. And I would always share with him with a recognition that I was learning from him. So I would use words and tones to thank him for teaching me something, or show him that I was grateful for him training me on a certain new software that I was using, or a new way of thinking about a certain model.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely very thankful and appreciative in my tone and attitude, but I knew that he wanted me to not defer to him, but to add as much value as possible to a conversation. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's still, yes, I understand, like I'm younger, and I want to show appreciation and respect to him, but not in the way that you might think, or in Eastern culture might think, where I might not say anything, or I might just defer to his opinion all the
Mm-hmm.
time. He wanted me to be a contributor. He wanted
Yeah.
me to be actively engaged. But at the same time, I did recognize that I didn't want to overstep. And these are subtle cues, I think, in my interaction that I wanted to continue to show that, I was willing to learn from him and be teachable. And I use that in my language and my questions and my comments to him. So I think that's something that I wove into my etiquette and my language. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think what you are talking is more about the attitude. Like it might not like exact words
Yeah.
that you use, like please, thank you, or Mr. or Mrs., but it's more about your attitude that you should show when you interact with the upper level.
Yes.
Is like willing to learn, um, want to contribute and speak up and discuss with them in limitation. I talk about
Yes.
limitations because I remember in very beginnings of my work, like sometimes I very stubborn and
Yeah.
my
Yes.
and my boss had difficult to persuade me. And at that moment, he just say, okay, I don't have time to persuade you right now, but just believe me because I work um, in a longer term than you. And I already go through all this experience and I know that this is true.
Yeah.
And then
I
I,
think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely, it's not the etiquette, it is the attitude, because people want to work with those that are
Mhm,
good listeners and
mhm,
are willing to learn, but they know that you can, and when you contribute, they're going to recognize it. So that's
yeah,
where sort of the egalitarian view is, like best opinions win. Great ideas can come to the top from any level,
mhm,
but at the same time, having respectful mindsets, attitudes towards each other, and having this, there's this subtle hierarchy of, I also really want to learn and I recognize your experience, not
mhm.
necessarily your title.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. I think like the hierarchy is established because of their experience, because of the
Yes.
working experience and your skill. It's not about your title, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, um, this I don't want to keep our conversations too long, but I have another question. It's not
Sure.
really related to this topic, but
Okay.
because you are an Asian American and my sons will be Asian Americans, I'm just curious about it. So during all the time you study from from kindergarten until college and workplace,
Mm.
have you ever been a victim of racism?
That's a great question. I grew up in a community that had maybe 7 to 10% Asian.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that my community was pretty diverse, and I think when I was growing up, there were positive views towards Asian Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't generally like worked hard, um, came from stable homes, um, did well in school. So I think there was positive views towards Asian Americans. I did find over time though that my father was telling me that um, there's people aren't always friendly towards Asian Americans because you may go into certain areas where they feel like you're maybe taking away their jobs or
Mm.
taking away their opportunities. So when our family moved to Michigan in the 1980s, um, in early 90s,
Where
when
you
we were
come
around
from
here.
first?
So I was born in New York, but I grew up in the Chicagoland area.
Uh-huh.
But I had a very brief period of time when I was in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
But during that time, there was a lot of the Japanese automotive companies were coming in, and so yeah, I think there was some sentiment towards negative sentiments towards Asians. And I think I'm just working through that and understanding that this is how people view, and that's not who I am, but and not letting what other people say define me. But I would say for sure, there are times when I might not see that people are treating me differently, but when I was growing up, but I think I'm more aware of that today in growing up, that that there are some views towards Asians that may not be the most favorable, that I need to be aware of and to prepare my mind to react appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the reason is that they thought that you took the job, right? Because I remember that time is our crisis, maybe like
Mm-hmm.
2008. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. It's a crisis time. So a lot of Asian move to this area.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And so 2008, that's a different time than the 1980s and 90s when you had the automotive challenges. But, in 2000, 8, whenever there's challenges, economic challenges, or even right now with COVID-19,
Mm-hmm.
I've been reading up and people have been asking me, have I experienced any racism?
Mm.
Because there may be a
Oh
group of
yeah.
people who actually blame me
Mm-hmm.
or blame Asians for bringing coronavirus to the United States.
But you are not from Chinese, right? Your
So,
parents.
so my parents are from Hong Kong.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So but
Mm-hmm.
I was born here. So we have, I've been aware of this conversation, and I've heard from other Asian Americans in the United States and in other cities where they have had negative, uh, experiences,
Mm.
um, where people have maybe, um, had racist attacks on them. And so I think, raising my children up now, I want them to be aware of these challenges. But I think we always try to, even if someone strikes you, it doesn't mean that you can immediately just strike back. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't want to be engaged in sort of these conversations and hate crimes
Right.
against each other. I think one of the best ways to respond is when people are angry, you show kindness and love and respect in return. I think
Mm-hmm.
that is more powerful than responding with equal hate and anger.
Yeah, I totally agree with you because I has been here for 5 years and I haven't experienced any racism. But after talking with some other peoples, I thought it's just because I ignored it.
Mm.
Like I didn't recognize it. So that is why I didn't feel that it's as it. But in fact, it is. It does, right?
Yeah, it's
Um,
definitely there. It's,
yeah.
and I would say Asian Americans probably, um, there are less negative stereotypes
Mm-hmm.
um, from people towards us. So I think that's why it's not as pronounced as maybe other forms of anger and racism that I have seen.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Yeah, I think we have a pretty informative conversation today and give a lot of helpful information for Vietnamese student. Um, and I just uh, want to let my viewer know that if you want to come to United States to study English for a while, so Michigan English Center, they can provide F1, no, I-20, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So if you want to come here to study English in summers or just a short periods of time, so they can provide I-20 to allow you to come to study and experience American life for a few months. Or
Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
And we
so
can
it's
help people go to university too. After they finish here, a lot of our Vietnamese students
mm,
will go to local universities. And nowadays, since we have online, you don't even have to wait to come. If you want to enroll in our online class,
mm-hmm.
you can take it live with our native English instructors.
Yeah, I really highly recommend people participate in your center because I learn a lot from you guys, not only about language, but also the cultural and help us understand American culture. Yeah, because you are Asian Americans, so you know both of the culture well, right?
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you very much for the time today, and I hope we can have maybe like another talk in the future.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I look forward to continue to collaborate with you in the future.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, take care. You can call it. Bye.
Bye.